British Empire was one of the largest and most influential empires in history, spanning over 400 years and leaving an indelible mark on the world. At its height, it covered nearly a quarter of the Earth's landmass and ruled over a quarter of the global population. The story of the British Empire is one of ambition, exploration, conquest, and eventual decline. It shaped the modern world in profound ways, from politics and economics to culture and language. Here's a detailed look at its rise and fall. The rise of the British Empire. The foundations, 16th to 17th century. The origins of the British Empire can be traced back to the Age of Exploration in the 16th century. During this time, European powers like Spain and Portugal were establishing vast overseas empires, fueled by the desire for wealth, resources, and new trade routes. England, a relatively small and isolated island nation, was late to the game but eager to catch up. Early ventures. England's first attempts at colonization were modest. In 1585, Sir Walter Raleigh established the Roanoke colony in present-day North Carolina, though it mysteriously disappeared. The first permanent English settlement was Jamestown, Virginia, founded in 1607. The East India Company. In 1600, the British East India Company was established to trade with Asia. Initially focused on spices, textiles, and tea, the company would later become a powerful force in India, laying the groundwork for British rule, the Caribbean, and the slave trade. By the mid-17th century, England had established colonies in the Caribbean, such as Barbados and Jamaica. These colonies became centers of sugar production, relying heavily on enslaved Africans brought across the Atlantic. The transatlantic slave trade became a cornerstone of Britain's economic power. Expansion and dominance, 18th to 19th century. The 18th and 19th centuries marked the peak of British imperial expansion. Through a combination of military conquest, strategic alliances, and economic dominance, Britain established itself as the world's foremost superpower. The 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763. Often called the First World War, this conflict pitted Britain against France and Spain. Britain emerged victorious, gaining control of Canada, Florida, and parts of the Caribbean. In India, the British East India Company defeated French forces, solidifying British dominance. The Industrial Revolution, Britain's industrial prowess, gave it a significant advantage. Factories produced goods at unprecedented rates, and the empire provided raw materials and markets for these products. The British Navy, the most powerful in the world, protected trade routes and enforced British interests globally. The scramble for Africa. In the late 19th century, European powers raced to colonize Africa. Britain claimed vast territories, including Egypt, South Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya. The construction of the Suez Canal in 1869 further strengthened Britain's control over trade routes to Asia. The jewel in the crown, India, became the centerpiece of the British Empire. After the Indian Rebellion of 1857, the British government took direct control from the East India Company, establishing the British Raj. India provided immense wealth, resources, and manpower to the empire. Cultural and political influence. The British Empire was not just about territorial control, it also spread British culture, language, and institutions. English became a global lingua franca, and British legal and political systems were adopted in many colonies. However, this cultural dominance often came at the expense of indigenous traditions and identities. The fall of the British Empire. The First World War, 1914 to 1918. The First World War marked the beginning of the end for the British Empire. Although Britain emerged victorious, the war took a heavy toll. Millions of soldiers from the colonies fought and died, and the economic cost was staggering. The war also fueled nationalist movements in colonies like India, where leaders like Mahatma Gandhi began demanding independence. The interwar period and the Great Depression. The 1920s and 1930s were a time of economic hardship and political unrest. The Great Depression weakened Britain's economy, making it difficult to maintain control over its vast empire. Meanwhile, nationalist movements gained momentum in colonies across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. The Second World War, 1939 to 1945. The Second World War was the final blow to the British Empire. Although Britain again emerged victorious, it was financially and militarily exhausted. The war exposed the vulnerabilities of colonial rule, and the United States and the Soviet Union emerged as the new global superpowers. Indian independence. In 1947, India gained independence, marking the end of the British Raj. The partition of India into India and Pakistan led to widespread violence and displacement. Decolonization. In the decades following World War II, Britain granted independence to most of its colonies. Countries like Ghana, 1957, Nigeria, 1960, and Kenya, 1963, gained independence, often after prolonged struggles. The Suez Crisis, 1956. Britain's failed attempt to regain control of the Suez Canal in Egypt highlighted its diminished global influence. The crisis marked a turning point, signaling the end of Britain's imperial ambitions. The legacy of the British Empire. By the late 20th century, the British Empire had largely dissolved, replaced by the Commonwealth of Nations, a voluntary association of independent states. The empire's legacy is complex and contested. Positive impacts. The British Empire spread technology, infrastructure, and education to many parts of the world. English became a global language, facilitating international communication. Negative impacts. Colonialism often involved exploitation, violence, and the suppression of local cultures. The effects of imperialism, including economic inequality and political instability, are still felt in many former colonies. Cultural exchange. The empire led to a blending of cultures, creating diverse societies in countries like the USA, Canada, Australia, and India. However, this cultural exchange was often one-sided, with British culture dominating.